Recording. Okay, thank you everyone for joining. We really appreciate you joining us here today for our All-in Research Network member seminar series. Today we're going to be hearing about farmers' access and willingness to pay for digital agro-weather advisories in high climate risk areas in Kenya. As we get started, just a couple of meeting protocols. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Please also, for now, leave your camera off unless you're the presenter. If you wish, it's up to you, Mercy, especially in consideration of potential network connectivity issues. Please use the chat for questions, comments throughout the presentation, and there's also going to be a designated time at the end of presentation for Q&A. This seminar is being recorded, and the recording and any supporting materials will be made available after the event. So we just want to welcome you on behalf of the All-in Research Network, and Sophie, who I think will be joining a little bit later. And I want to welcome everybody and thank you all for joining. We really appreciate your participation. And then with that very brief introduction, I want to pass it to our presenter, Dr. Mercy Kamau. Mercy, please, I'll allow you to take over, introduce yourself a bit more, and go ahead and get started.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Nairobi. My name is Mercy Kamau. I am a senior research fellow at Tegemeo Institute. Tegemeo is an institute of agricultural policy and development. It is affiliated to Egerton University in Kenya. So today you know the topic. Let me just share that. So today we are talking about a study that we have undertaken under the All-in initiative. I'm just trying to drag something down here. Yeah. So the study we are going to talk about, I'm going to talk about today is farmers' willingness to pay for agro-weather advisories and in high climate risk agricultural areas. This is a study on a Feed the Future Advanced Local Leadership Innovation and Networks Research Project. It is a study and one of the objectives of a larger study on the impact of agro-weather advisories. We carried out this study as a team, and the other team members are from Tegemeo, Dr. Lillian Keremi and John Borrow. And then also we work with Professor Bradford Mills, who is our mentor from Virginia Tech University. So the outline of my presentation, I'll talk a little bit about the All-in project, and I'll motivate the willingness to pay study. We'll discuss our approach, the findings, and the significance of these findings. So as a background, as you are aware, the livelihoods of rural households in sub-Saharan Africa are based on climate-sensitive or weather-sensitive agricultural sector. And because of that, the livelihoods of smallholder farmers, income and livelihoods are impacted directly. We see reduced earnings, as studied by Kabubo, Mariara, and Karanja, reduced earnings through diminished productivity and crop failures. Indirectly, we also see reduced earnings through increased production costs and seasonal unemployment. And hence, farmers' adaptation is necessary to offset the negative impacts of climate change and weather variability, and to achieve adequate and sustained livelihoods. Why does it move, Tara? Okay. Sorry about that. Erratic rainfalls and droughts, these are the major risks in Kenya's agriculture. You find that 90% of Kenya's agriculture is rain-fed, and over 80% of the country is arid or semi-arid. And we have seen Kenya becoming increasingly vulnerable to extreme and growing weather variability. We see more frequent and long and dry spells, more frequent dry spells, and they're longer. And then also we see variability in the onset of rains. They either come too early, too late. The extreme weather events also are more frequent every 2 to 3 years. And as well as we are experiencing increasing interannual rainfall variability, more frequent droughts over large parts of our country. Together with low incomes and high poverty rates, then Kenya becomes very vulnerable to climate change. This is according to the World Bank study in 2015. Because of these challenges, accurate and timely, relevant and usable weather information can support farmers to understand climate conditions and also help them act or adapt appropriately. We all know, but historically, and in fact, for a large majority of the farmers, relying on indigenous climate knowledge to make cropping decisions, this information having been passed down from generation to generation, and of course, acquired through experience. But increasingly, because of the variability in onset of rainfall and changes in the length of seasons and increases in extreme temperatures, farmers' information that, of course, they have acquired over time is becoming less reliable or useful for decision-making. Hence, science-based climate information services have the potential to empower farmers in climate-vulnerable regions. The cell phone, even a basic phone, potentially it is a valuable tool that can be used to disseminate climate information because it is cost-effective, and the mobile phone networks have improved dramatically across sub-Saharan Africa. It is an opportunity then to reach farmers. It provides an opportunity to reach farmers with climate information at scale and at minimal cost and in a timely manner. But there is a downside to the mobile phone. Agricultural information is complex and difficult to deliver. And there are also questions on effectiveness due to low literacy and in the population that we're trying to reach. And then also this potential of crowding out of important messages, or farmers not even understanding what is being communicated to them. I'm having challenges with this movement. Digital agro-weather advisories, the topic that we wish to speak to today. This is an initiative of Kenya Climate Smart Agriculture Project. The Kenya Agricultural Research Organization produces and disseminates agro-weather advisories to farmers. They provide timely integrated market, weather, and agronomic information that is specific to crop or livestock value chains. And it is aimed at guiding farmers' decisions based on local weather conditions. It is also a way of increasing farmer consumption of its information and agronomic information, crop protection, and other information that is already available. The project, this intervention is supported under the government and World Bank funded Kenya Climate Smart Project. At some point, farmers it is expected that farmers will be paying for these advisories through subscriptions. So farmers receive 2 to 4 messages monthly. And this information that they receive is in their preferred language. And of course, as I said, for their preferred value chain, the messages received are specific to the growth of the crop or the life cycle of the animal, the livestock. And farmers are also encouraged to share their feedback they receive a number there. You will see there's that number there. It is a toll-free number, and farmers are expected to call back to the call center. At commencement of the willingness to pay study, in March 2022, farmers had received the advisories for a season, and the next season advisories were ongoing. So why did we decide to undertake the willingness to pay study? Since the 8 years down the road, since the project was designed, the project has several other components, and the agro-weather advisories is one of them. And 4 seasons into the agro-weather advisories provision, the weather advisories continue being provided to farmers by the public agencies, provided freely, free of charge. And we still don't have information on demand, and there's no concrete plan for scaling the delivery of these advisories. And this is a case in many other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. There are brief mentions that farmers at some undefined point will start paying for the agro advisories, but we lack relevant data and evidence to inform this discussion about scaling and sustainability. Hence, this is a concern. Information about willingness to pay for climate information services may help determine appropriate pricing. If we set the price too low, it would compromise sustainability and, of course, fail to attract investors. Setting the price too low or too high also may lock out potential users, the ones that are cash constrained or the poor. Further, estimation, knowing the farmer's willingness to pay helps us estimate the potential revenue that would be generated through provision of the climate information services. And this information on demand for weather services will inform decisions on where public resources, the scarce public resources should be used within the CIS space. Where best would the public resources be used? Right now, we don't know without this information on farmers' willingness to pay. Drivers of willingness to pay and the attributes of farmers who are unlikely to pay for the service is crucial. And it is crucial in designing the strategy for delivering the services and enriching resource-constrained farmers. So the objectives of this study were 3. In the first one, we estimate the willingness to pay. And in the second one, we determine the drivers of farmers' decision to pay or not for their advisory services. And we determine whether farmers are willing to pay enough to fully support provision of these services. The evidence is crucial, as I have indicated, on for crucial policy decisions, how to continue providing the digital agro-weather services, and the level, whether subsidy is required, the level of that subsidy, or a price discount where a private sector would be providing, and for whom, and also what would be the role of the government. This information will help us answer these policy questions. So how did we estimate farmers' willingness to pay? In this study, we have used the contingent valuation method, information about the value of the good in this method was elicited by constructing a hypothetical market. And in this approach, actual or potential users of a good or a service are asked that question, whether they are willing to pay for the good. Response biases that may arise from limited experience, maybe I need to indicate that this approach is employed where there isn't a market, a known market for the good or service. And so there may be some response biases arising from limited experience or understanding of the products that are being referred to in this hypothetical market. But in this particular study, this is limited because the sample of farmers that we spoke to are beneficiaries of the project, those that were being targeted by these advisories, by this project. we have used specifically the double-bounded dichotomous choice method. In this method, the respondents, the farmers, were asked two questions, two consecutive willingness to pay questions, bids, both of which farmer was required to give a yes or a no answer. The initial bids were set at shillings, Kenya shillings 30, 60, 100, and 150. They were based on information that was gathered. This information is based, the price at which we set this is based on information we gathered from key informants in private companies that are providing in a short, in a small way, advisories to farmers. So following paparizos, the subsequent bids was set at twice the initial bid for those who answered yes, and half the initial bid where the farmer gave an answer no. Respondents were, the farmers were randomly assigned to the 4 initial bids. So there was no self-selection on which bid farmer would be responding to. They were randomly assigned to avoid the starting bias. In this method, the double-bounded dichotomous method, we are able to gather a lot of information. And so compared to the single bound dichotomous method, where we only ask one whether the farmer is willing to pay for the initial bid, in this double-bounded dichotomous method, the follow-up, because of the follow-up bid, we are able to collect much more information, and hence it is said to provide more precise estimates of the willingness to pay. As you can see, we are able to get much more information than just one level. I'm not going to that. In this willingness to pay model, we included other variables that help explain the farmer's willingness to pay. We're referring to them as the covariates. And our covariates are categorized into 3. We have information and information provider attributes, user attributes, and environment attributes. In the information and information provider attributes, we included whether the farmer received advisories from CALRO and whether they received advisories from other sources. Under the user attributes, we have farmer characteristics like gender, age, years of education, number of dependents, cultivated acreage, wealth, whether they are engaging in farming as a main occupation, the number of the crop diversity in terms of number of crops grown, and whether they engage in self-employment. Under the environment attributes, we included exposure to extreme weather, such as whether they experience drought, flood. We also included the rainfall variability, coefficient of variation, and the zone. You will see from the areas where we carried out this study, we have 3 zones. We also included whether farmers had adopted teams. We think the policy environment that in which farmers are operating will affect whether they adopt the teams or not. We also included other variables that are determined by the policy environment, including access to extension, access to market information, access to credit, and weather information. So these are the covariates we included in the willingness to pay model. The data used varied. For the user characteristics for that information that I have included there as covariates, we used the Kenya Climate Smart Agriculture Project baseline data. And this baseline survey was conducted in September 2020, and it was carried out in 9 counties in out of the 24 where the project is intervening. We also collected data on willingness to pay through a survey that was conducted in March 2022 from 2,384 households out of the 3,050 that were in the baseline and had a cell phone or a telephone number. So there were some numbers that we had reached in the baseline, 666 that we could not reach. The other data that we used is long-term rainfall data from the Kenya Met Department. These data are at the ward level. They call it grid data because it combines actual weather observations and data from satellite stations. And from this data, we were able to generate the rainfall variability coefficient of variation. So from this map of Kenya, we see the areas, the areas shaded red as where we collected our data. The shaded areas in the dark pink, the yellowish and the green. That's where the project is intervening. The green areas are medium to high rainfall areas. We have semi-arid areas, pale yellow, and the arid areas are in the north. Because of the households that dropped out or that we could not reach in their willingness to pay, we thought that we need to reweight the survey data and because there were differences in the original sample, the original baseline sample and the willingness to pay sample, there were differences. They had more years of education, planted more crops, were more likely to have received advisories from CALRA and other sources. So we used the info-ranking weight calibration procedure using baseline information about the age, gender, and education level. We calibrated that and generated sample weights for each respondent. That was just to correct for that bias. Maybe I can just keep this. These are the weight adjusted means. I'll just skip this for now. We could go back to that later on. So from our descriptive information from the data that we collected on the bids, the data on the bids, the initial bid, the average was 85. That's the average of that number. And for the follow-up bid, that 84 was the average bid, That's just the average number. The responses to the first bid, you can see they are closer to the 0 than to the 1, means most of them gave a no. And the responses to the second bid were mainly yeses. It's higher, closer to 1. The distribution of yes responses in the initial bids in this table, these are the initial bids. Initial bids means we ask the farmer, would you be willing to pay 30? And while others were asked whether they'd be willing to pay 60, others were asked whether they'd be willing to pay 100, and others were asked whether they'd be willing to pay 150. The farmers were randomly assigned to these four bids. And the yeses to the first bid, you can see that a no's the no's were increasing, or there were less yeses as the bid amount increases. The yeses were less as the bid amount increases, and the no's were more as the bid amount increases. This just means that the farmers were responsive to the bid amount. They were sensitive to the price, and that is just what we expected. So, going on to our findings, in this section, we're going to talk about how much farmers are willing to pay, the drivers of farmers' willingness to pay, the potential revenue that could be generated, and then also look at the characteristics of farmers that are unlikely to pay. and who is unlikely to pay, or are there farmers that are unlikely to pay? So from our study, we have estimated that in Kenya shillings, using the double B command in Stata and data weighting, and also including covariates, that the willingness to pay, the average willingness to pay is 91 shillings per month. This was a month we asked whether they'd be willing to pay. The timing was a month. And from literature, we have found that this estimate is similar to some, but also quite different from other studies. And the studies that we found willingness to pay undertaken were mainly in West Africa. And the fact that others are high or more means that willingness to pay depends on the type of climate information service and the context in which farmers are operating. Moving on to the factors, the drivers influencing farmers' willingness to pay for agro-weather advisories. In this table, we provide those that were statistically significant and still arranged in the same order of 3 categories: information and information provider attributes, user attributes, and environment and socioeconomic attributes. Under information and information provider attributes, we found that farmers were willing to pay up to 9 shillings more for advisories that were received from KALRO. On the other hand, they were willing to pay 14 shillings less for advisories that were not from KALRO, from other sources. So you can see farmers more willing to pay more for advisories that are from KALRO. We can discuss this a little bit more as we move forward. On the user attributes, farmers who participated in self-employment were willing to pay more, as were farmers who were engaging in agriculture as a primary economic activity. They were also willing to pay more. And farmers that were cultivating higher farm sizes, higher acreages, were also willing to pay more, although it's smaller, but it's quite significant. And on the environmental and socioeconomic attributes, we just found that farmers in semi-arid areas were willing to pay much more. And the comparison was to farmers that are in medium to high rainfall areas. So farmers in semi-arid regions were willing to pay more compared to their counterparts in medium to high rainfall areas. But the farmers in arid, there was no difference between the farmers in arid, willingness to pay of farmers in arid regions and the farmers in medium to high potential areas. We can discuss this a little bit. On the information provider and information attributes, the results suggest that farmers view agro-weather advisories from KALRO favorably. Probably they find them relevant or trustworthy. We were not able to unpack why, but we think that they may be finding this more relevant or trustworthy or usable. It could be any of this. Of course, this may be suggesting maybe to find out more. But from what we think that, and from literature, we think that maybe this could be the reasons why farmers preferred this information compared to, would be willing to pay more for KALRO advisories compared to other sources. And then we had a variable about farmers' prior experience, whether they had received agro-weather advisories before the baseline, but we found that this did not influence their willingness to pay. And this kind of results from our understanding would mean that, if farmers who had received prior experience were not willing to pay, then this means that probably the prior information could have been less reliable, and this may dampen the market for climate information service where we have less reliable information. User attributes Engagement in farming as an economic activity and self-employment, rather than personal characteristics of gender, age, education, shape farmers' willingness to pay. This was a surprising finding that gender, education, and others did not influence farmers' willingness to pay, rather whether they engage in an economic activity and whether they are self-employed. That was the main driver. Wealth also did not influence farmers' willingness to pay, and but farmers cultivating larger acreages were willing to pay, probably because they can be able to spread out their costs across, a higher fixed costs out. They can spread out that costs on a bigger farm size. Environment attributes. Exposure to extreme weather like drought or floods in the previous year had no effect. And as I said, there were significant differences between the two zones. The semi-arid region, they were willing to pay much more than the high medium rainfall. And we think maybe because these farmers are, there's high potential in these areas, but they are prone to weather variability, and the risks of climate change are much higher in this. But although, and so compared to the medium to high rainfall zones, and so they may be way. And for the farmers in the arid zones, probably farmers in those zones have adapted already to the variability. Maybe they have already taken up measures to protect themselves, or to protect themselves, from the risks associated with the extreme fluctuations that they encounter in their environment compared to the high to medium to high rainfall zones. With respect to now, once we had estimated the willingness to pay, the average willingness to pay, then the next question was about sustainability of this initiative. And so we went ahead to estimate the potential revenue potentially from subscription fees that farmers would pay. Potentially, remember, this is potential. And from the 91 shillings, a season going on, because the season would last maybe for 4 months. We used 4 months. That would mean 364 shillings in a season. The inferred revenue from this, the project was targeting to reach 1 million farmers with agro-weather advisories. This would translate to $3.6 million using an exchange rate of 100. Of course, we know this is low in Kenya in a season. So the potential revenue, assuming 3.6 million in a season. On the side of costs, we did not use actual expenditures. We have not yet accessed this information. So we are using actual expenditures. So we are using project costs from the project documents, the PAD. And as I said, the project was aimed at reaching 1 million farmers, and delivery of agro-weather advisories falls under subcomponent 3.2 of KSAP project. And the advisories were to be sent for those three seasons. So we are assuming that for one season would cost something like 1.237, just dividing that 3.2 million by 3 to get the cost per season. This is a rough estimate, really. And it doesn't even include initial investments, human capital, and others that are already in place and were not supported through the project, and others that were not supported through the project. So this is just a rough estimate. But as you can see from this rough estimate, we are saying that the potential revenue that could be generated if farmers were to pay 91, a million farmers were to pay 91 shillings per month, would be much higher than the costs. This is just a glimpse of this is just indicating how we can use some information such as this to inform policy. But more importantly, we wanted to see whether there are farmers who are not willing to pay, or and what are the characteristics of these farmers. We have we used prediction from our model. We were able to predict. Remember that the 3.64 million is based on the average willingness to pay, but our prediction shows that many of the farmers would be willing to pay below this average of 91 shillings. And there's a figure that I'll show after this slide. And from this simulation, the farmers that are willing to pay beyond the price of 60 shillings per month starts falling drastically. The proportion of farmers that will be willing to pay beyond 60 starts falling drastically. The higher the price, the fewer the proportion of farmers that will be willing to pay. From the willingness to pay survey data, we see that subscription-based service would likely exclude 49% of the targeted farmers, because these farmers, 49%, who are, in the sample, were not willing to pay either the initial bid or the follow-up bid. They gave a no. Would you be willing to pay any of the four? Not any of the four, one of the four, no. And when you give a no response, there was that we halved that price, and they say no to the next lower price. So these are large proportion, 49%, 49.3%. And so that means, and then on the other hand, 50% were willing to pay at least one of the bids. They gave a yes, either to the lower bid, the first initial bid, or to a lower or a higher bid. 50% they had at least one yes. So with that information, okay, this is the graph that I'm showing, that I'm talking about the prediction. This is a cumulative distribution of the predicted willingness to pay. And the 91 shilling is just about there. But we're saying after 60 shillings, farmers willing to pay falls drastically. This is just a graphical demonstration of the demand for agro-weather advisories. Why are these findings important, and for whom are they important? How can they be used? This study on willingness to pay fills important knowledge or information gaps. One, it provides a strong indication that there exists a market for digital agro-weather services in Kenya. The study findings were that farmers are willing to pay a fee to receive the advisories, and it further shows that the fee they are willing to pay could cover some costs related to, the delivery of the advisories if farmers subscribe. Secondly, revealing the value that farmers assign to agro-weather advisories enhances the likelihood of attracting resources or investors to such initiatives. And so these findings are likely to attract the private sector, and even county governments would be willing, would pay attention to such information. Further, it informs the operationalization of a subscription fee-based agro-weather service. The market for agro-weather advisories is, the study has shown that it is segmented, that the prices that farmers are willing to pay are different, and hence differentiating fees for this service according to the farmer needs or characteristics would this suggests that we would need to differentiate the subscription fee by farmers' needs or farmers' characteristics. It also suggests that purely privatized agro-weather advisory service is likely to exclude many smallholder farmers And from a public sector, perspective, these findings provide a basis for either partial privatization. For example, you could privatize the delivery of the service, while generation of weather information and packaging it could be left to the public sector. Findings also suggest, also provide a strong basis for a targeted government subsidy to ensure all farmers benefit from this service, irrespective of their ability to pay. Further, the characteristics of farmers who need to be targeted, the study suggests who are these that would be targeted with such a subsidy or a discount. One, we see that farm size is an important indicator of farmers that are unwilling to pay. Further, we saw that farmers are willing to pay more for advisories from Cairo, and we are saying that this suggests that they're willing to pay more for advisories from a trusted or reliable agro-weather service. And hence continuing investment in farmer trusted public MET and R&D systems to provide agro-weather services is critical, at least in the short to medium term. But even from other advanced nations, we have seen that heavy funding for weather information, for climate information. So that would suggest that provision of weather information is critical and needs to be funded and funded well. But further, there's need to encourage others, the private sector, to provide, to enter this space and to strengthen their services, to build and cultivate farmers' trust, and also to add value to the agro-weather information received. There's a lot of ways that weather information can be packaged and also bundled with other services, as we have seen other people doing. And then maybe the last thing that I would want to touch on is maybe just posing this question, whether full recovery should be the goal. We're talking about sustainability, whether, and then this question is, should full recovery be the goal? I think all that we can say here is some considerations that are important. One, digital weather information exhibits characteristics that of non-rivalry and non-excludable, means that once the cost of producing weather information, whether you're producing for a few farmers or for many, is the same. Yeah. So it doesn't increase your cost to produce information for more farmers. The other thing is that it is difficult to exclude farmers who have not, for example, if you go with a subscription fee, it's difficult to exclude farmers or users of this information, because even if they're not receiving directly, they can easily receive this information from others. Remember, we're talking about digital. We're talking about information that has been that can be passed on from one person to another using the phone. The other consideration is that once produced, the marginal cost of providing weather information digitally is essentially zero. And here, this is where then services of value addition and bundling then come in, where you find other investors can come in and provide value addition to the weather information that have already been, the agro-weather information that has been produced. And finally, the economic benefits derived from a public good like climate information services increases with the user. So the more users, the more the benefits to society. So charging a fee that would limit users would reduce the social benefits that we derive from it. And I think that is the end of our presentation. I'd like to acknowledge the support received from USAID through the University of California, the MRR Lab, for this support to undertake this study and the ongoing activities. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Mercy. So I guess at this point, I'd like to open it up to any questions. We have about 10 minutes for any questions and answers. Please do feel free to raise your hand and come off mute, or go ahead and put your question into the chat if you have any questions. Are there any questions to get us started? Again, feel free to raise your hand if you prefer to ask your question out loud. Yeah, Dr. Kataza, please.
Yes, thank you, Tala, and thank you, Mercy, for the nice presentation. It was quite inspiring listening to you again. So I just want to seek clarification. So in this study, do we have farmers or message recipients who, okay, do we have people who did not receive the message at all? So my interest here is to see whether the willingness to pay is only intended for those that received the messages, or if it contains those that did not receive a message at all. So in my feeling, I feel that if these people received the messages, that could give a true reflection of their willingness to pay, because they have experienced the technology, so they know what it is capable, as compared to others that did not receive at all. So that is where I want to understand if there is that segregation, or if we can segregate the analysis and check those that didn't receive versus those that received. And the average willingness to pay, which is 91 Kenya shillings, is it per message or is per participation? Because in this case, we understand that the advisory can be isolated as one bit. I received the message today, maybe I have to receive again in another week or another month. So the willingness to pay, is it per advisory service, as in the message that they received at that particular time? For example, if it pertains to marketing, or if it pertains to production, or it's just the generalized service for the whole season. Thanks, and over.
Great, thank you so much for your question. Mercy, I pass to you. You're currently on mute.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I thought there was another question coming in. Thank you, Dr. Kataza. In this sample, we estimate the willingness to pay for all farmers in our sample that we collected data from. And in this sample, there are farmers who had received advisories and others who had, let me say CALRO advisories. There are some who had received CALRO advisories and some who had not. There are others who had received some form of advisories. And the question that was posed to them, remember it's a hypothetical question. So we described a service, the service, Agro Advisory, digital. And so it was not really speaking to the CALRO advisory, but it was a hypothetical kind of framing of a question that was the same, whether you had received or not. And the analysis that we have provided is for all the farmers. And we have not segregated that information. There were like, I think 40% had already received Agro with advisories, but we did not segregate the information because the question posed to them was the same. The hypothetical question was the same. And on the willingness to pay, the 91 shillings, the average price of 91 shillings is not per message. It is a monthly fee. Remember I said that farmers, the CALRO Agro-Weather advisories are sent, farmers are sent up to 4 messages in a month across, and every month, so they're receiving messages. and the messages flow throughout the growing season, or over the month, or over the 4 months if it is a crop. So when we talk about a month, this is referring to, actually the actual messages were, let's say, 2 to 3 messages received, and that's what we would be talking about. However, I think it would make sense to talk about a season, and that's why we have rounded it off to 364 in a season, because then that would be the complete package of information that the farmer would be receiving. I don't know whether I've answered your questions. So 91 is for a month, but we've just estimated that a season is 4 months, and given that price of 364 for a season. A price for a season would make more sense than a month. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we have 2 more questions, which is I think all we have time for. So let's go ahead and hear both of those 2 questions. So I think it's Ismail Sanusi. I apologize if I pronounced your name wrong.
Yeah, thanks. You pronounced it quite well.
Good.
Thanks for your presentation. I don't know. I'm just wondering. I just want to know, for example, what you think about the results you presented, and then of course the implications for weather index based insurance markets, and then if there are any synergies or conflicts. Thank you.
Okay, and great. And Mercy, before you answer that one, I'm going to ask Margaret to also share her question so that you can address both together.
Okay. Thank you, Mercy, for that nice presentation. My question is, you see the farmers are willing to pay for trustworthy source of weather information. Did you ask them at all about the trust they had on either the government or the private information providers, or it was something that's what you actually found out by the data they gave you? Because I'm thinking that in the long run, okay, you showed that there's a possibility of a hybrid of the government providing this and the private sector probably doing the, they can share. One gets the data, the other one maybe release it to the farmers. But the word trust, that's what I was wondering. How did you get that? Is it a question you asked them? Was it explicit or implicit? Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
you,
you,
Margaret.
Yeah. Thank you for those questions. Maybe I can start about what do I think about the results. Let me just say that we were excited to be able to put a number to a shilling to the information that this had not been done before. So we were quite excited about this, and I think this information gives a good indication. It's rigorously done. This may not be the gold standard. There are other methods, the BDM method. But this is a good indication and a good starting point. Whether you're asking, I think what do you mean as what do you think about the result, whether this is it? We were wondering whether there is going to be value added by, doing another round of the willingness to pay study just to see whether we're going to get different information after farmers had received for the further term. But this is a good indication. And going further about what we think, we, of course, the agro-weather advisories that farmers have been receiving may have some shortcomings here and there. And my conversations with colleagues from Cairo indicate that they are also thinking about how to be responsive to farmers' needs and farmers' circumstances in the coming rounds. And so definitely the information can be used, and there are opportunities also to reestimate the willingness to pay based on more refined advisories that are responsive to the farmers' needs and conditions on the farm and things like that. So, but from a research perspective, I think it's a good thing that we're able to put in a number, and but definitely additional studies, any other studies would be welcome, because then there would be triangulation and comparison of results to explain, to see whether there's and how this would vary across different contexts and value chains. Actually, these are farmers who we did not differentiate by value chain, so there may be reason and need for further investigation, and for more studies. As to whether there's any conflict with, for example, the weather-based index insurance and other insurance that are being provided, I do not think there's any conflict. Farmers' adaptation will require different tools, and information is one of the tools that they require to help them make decisions. The others, like insurance, also critical in ensuring that farmers, the impact of this climate risk is well managed, that farmers are shielded from the impact from climate change and weather variability. In fact, I think there are interventions, there are some agencies that are bundling weather information with, or there is potential to bundle the weather information with this index-based insurance. So I do not see any conflict at all. I just see that these are tools that the farmer needs, interventions that the farmer needs to be able to adapt to climate change and weather variability. The other question is on the question on trust and whether we asked farmers this question. No, we did not ask farmers this question. We have tried to do that in a qualitative study that we are doing. We've tried to ask farmers a few questions about the advisories that they were receiving in a qualitative study. But in the quantitative study, we did not. In the willingness to pay study, we did not. But from literature, we have seen that usability of information, trust, and such issues are important. And farmers will base their willingness to pay or not willingness to pay on such characteristics. So what we are saying, where we are finding that farmers are willing to pay more, for example, from Cairo's agro advisories, farmers were willing to pay more. We are hypothesizing that farmers may have found them more usable, may have trust, because this trust is built from interaction with the provider. Farmers have been interacting with Cairo for some time, and they trust, for example, the interventions when Cairo goes with new improved breeds or things like that. Farmers are quite responsive because they have trust for this system. So in turn, farmers, because they have interacted with Cairo for some time, that's why then we would say farmers are more willing to pay for agro-weather advisories from a trusted source. Why? Because of that interaction. The trust is built by interacting with farmers repeatedly and being available for questions. That kind of interaction builds farmers' trust. So from that is what we are terming CARO's agro-advisories as trustworthy. Not because it is a government-based institution, but because they have been interacting with farmers for a long time. And your comment about a hybrid system, I agree with you. And in fact, in one of the slides, we have said that the last one where we are saying should cost recovery, full cost recovery be the goal. We are saying maybe not, and that what we are implying is that there's space for the public sector to generate weather forecast, to generate this weather information, and there's also room for the private sector to add value, to bundle it with interventions and technology such as insurance, and to deliver to the farmers. So there's room for that hybrid system. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I think that is all the time we have. I'm sure Mercy would be happy if you have any questions afterward to follow up separately with you. But in the meantime, we want to thank you so much, Mercy, for sharing your research and your time. And thank you everyone for joining. Again, the recording from this event will be made available shortly after we've had some time to review it and post it. So look forward to that. But thank you so much for your participation and have a good rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.